This is RT coming to you live from Moscow. I'm Marina Joshi. Welcome to the program. Al-Qaeda-linked rebels have attacked a Christian village in Syria, home to one of the world's oldest monasteries. The army has responded and secured much of the settlement, but residents say radical opposition fighters have seized nearby hills and are firing indiscriminately at the community. Our correspondent in Damascus, Maria Finoshna, reports.
We tried to get to Ma'alula village shortly after we heard that the clashes erupted there. It's just 1 hour drive from Damascus, north of the capital. But we were stopped by the army and warned that it could be a one-way ticket because, first of all, the road from Damascus to Ma'alula is not safe. But even if we are lucky enough to get to the village, the clashes still continue there, and there are still some snipers who are active on the ground. So the situation is very dangerous. So it's better not to go there, as we were told. We are hearing that the fighting is between the army and the militants, mostly from Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda affiliated group fighting here in Syria against the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but mostly for their own radical Islam state. It's believed to be the best armed, the most successful, and at the same time the most aggressive opposition force here in Syria, and it's listed as a terrorist organization by the UN, US, and some other members of the international community. And we can see that the tactics were also very similar to those that terrorists all around the world use. We know that early on Wednesday, a suicide bomber struck a checkpoint at the entrance of Ma'alula village. And after a car exploded at the checkpoint, the militants of Jabhat al-Nusra stormed in. And we have online video, and I hope you can see it right now, showing rebels entering the city, and residents have been telling media that the same day the militants managed to take over a mountaintop Safir hotel, and they've been firing from that strategic point. What we know is that Ma'alula village is a very special place, not only speaking in terms of Syrian reality, but internationally speaking. It is home to an Orthodox shrine, a 4th century Catholic church, and dozens of mosques. So its religious heritage is very solid, and it was protected by the government, and it was what we saw during this crisis, respected by the rebels. But after this recent attack, of course, the whole Christian community, not only here in Syria but all over the world, was shaken. And let's now listen to one nun. RT managed to speak from Latakia, what she says about the situation and about the fears of the Christian minority here in Syria.
How can the international community ignore the brutal killing spree in Latakia early on August the 5th? An attack that affected 500 people, including children, women and older people. In the village of Ostreba, they massacred all the residents and burned down their houses. In another village, almost all of the 37 locals were killed. Only 10 people were able to escape. 12 Alawite villages were subjected to this horrendous attack. It was a true slaughterhouse. People were mutilated and beheaded. There is even a video that shows a girl being dismembered alive with a soul.
Well, it's worth to mention that Ma'alula has very troubled neighbors. Another village of Yabrud, center of smuggling here in Syria, is just 20 minutes drive from Ma'alula. Homs, the city known as the epicenter of the clashes, 100 kilometers away from Ma'alula. But we are hearing from some Free Syrian Army members from some opposition members that the idea of attacking this village was to clear the road from the city of Homs in central Syria to Damascus, because this village was the only one not touched by the rebels. But these are just rumors. It's very hard to confirm.
David Tan's brainstorming has begun at the G20 summit in St. Petersburg. It's a fresh chance to try and seek some common ground after day one saw the Syrian crisis split leaders of the world's top economies into two rival camps. Now, around half of the G20 members said no to America's intention to strike Syria without the UN's go-ahead. Washington accuses Damascus of using chemical weapons in a more than 2-year-long war, but its arguments failed to convince all. Now, let's cross live to our correspondent, Alexei Yershevsky, who is following the summit for us there. Hello to you, Alexei. So Syria was not the official topic of the G20 agenda, but clearly became its main talking point. Tell us what's going on. What's the latest, and how has been discussions playing out so far?
Well, it's safe to say that the Syrian conflict has pretty much consumed the economic agenda of the G20 summit in St. Petersburg, and that to a large extent epitomized in a statement by the head of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, who described the Syrian conflict as the biggest humanitarian catastrophe over the last several decades. Indeed, the number of internally displaced refugees in the country has exceeded 4.5 million. 2 million more people had to leave their homes as a result of the conflict. More than 100,000 people dead already, so this creates serious concerns in Europe. So definitely Barroso wants a peaceful resolution to the conflict. He doesn't want a strike on the country to be performed. The same opinion goes along with the chairman of the European Council, Mr. Van Rompuy. Also the same opinion is voiced by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who said that that Geneva II conference must be held in the quickest time possible in order to find a peaceful solution. He also stands against any kind of military intervention. But despite all this rhetoric coming from these three major figures, there seemed to be no consensus whatsoever among the G20 member states. Last night they had a very lengthy gala dinner which lasted more than 5 hours, finished late in the night. We do not know what kind of rhetoric was used there. We do not know what kind of plans and schemes were discussed there, but we do know from Putin's spokesperson that Syria definitely was the main topic of discussion among the leaders of the G20 states. And we do know as well that, according to Mr. Peskov, that the countries were split in their opinion on how the Syrian conflict should be resolved, through military intervention or through diplomatic means.
Well, indeed, Alexei, the split is quite obvious, but what do we know about those who are for intervention and those who are against it?
We're certainly waiting for press conferences of all G20 members. Maybe they will have something to say on that and voice their positions. But judging by the statements we have received so far, we can say that Russia's and China's position hasn't changed the slightest. They are still opposing a military action against Syria. Same goes for Germany and Italy. Both of them said that they would not take part in this conflict should it happen. In fact, the only European major state which would participate in such military action is France. 6 more European states also support the idea of a strike against Syria. That is Turkey, Romania, Poland, Cyprus, Croatia and Latvia. But all in all, there's no unity among the European Union member states, among the G20 member states, and despite obviously long, lengthy talks, we have seen no common ground among the G20 member states on that issue.
All right, Alexei, thank you so much for keeping us abreast of what's happening there. And Alexei Yershevsky reporting from St. Petersburg. Now, if you want to find out the details of what leaders had to say and what they might mean, head to RT.com. Still ahead, we take a look at the financial side of things in St. Petersburg. Recovery, stagnation, and picking up the pieces are all the talk today, with the BRICS group of emerging economies working out the details of a new global mega bank. Now, the U.S. not only failed to get anywhere near a unanimous nod for its war plan for Syria at the G20, it's also struggling to convince its own lawmakers and the public that the strike is necessary. Even usually staunch allies like Britain saw Parliament pour cold water on Prime Minister Cameron's drive to help the Americans. RT's Igor Piskunov looks at whether there's actually enough proof to back the bombing.
The intelligence services of the U.S., France and Britain have all presented reports suggesting it was the Syrian authorities who used chemical weapons on August 21st. Let's look at their arguments. Open source reports are presented among the key evidence by all three services.
Instead of being tucked safely in their beds at home, we saw rows of children lying side by side, sprawled on a hospital floor.
Open sources are actually videos on YouTube and social networks. This brings us to the second argument, presented once again unilaterally. It's knowledge of previous chemical attacks allegedly conducted by the Assad regime. UN experts, however, still haven't been able to agree on whether or not chemical weapons were deployed during the conflict in Syria and by which side. Now, argument number 3. Washington, Paris, and London claim intensified fire in the area of the alleged attack is another sign the authorities were behind it. This way, they allegedly tried destroying the evidence. Now, finally, the fourth key argument presented by all three is that the rebels are simply incapable of using chemical weapons.
There is no credible intelligence or other evidence to substantiate the claims or the possession of chemical weapons by the opposition.
Earlier, the UN said it had evidence suggesting otherwise. So, it's pretty clear the arguments are completely the same, but interestingly, the reactions they cause in these countries are not.
The government's amendment does not mention compelling evidence against President Assad.
I will seek authorization for the use of force from the American people's representatives in Congress.
I'm waiting for an answer. France cannot act on its own.
So, as Washington waits for Congress, Paris for Washington, and London's dropped out altogether, U.S. senators are set to make a decision on the issue next week.
The United States Congress vote on Syrian intervention is now not far off, and pollsters are keeping tabs on which way the wind is blowing. So far, it's certainly not blowing in Obama's favor. While the Senate looks likely to vote in favor of war, it's a very different story in the House of Representatives. According to an updated poll by Think Progress, a mere 43 lawmakers say they will or are at least likely to vote in favor of attacking Assad. Now, a staggering 212, though, say they will vote no or are leaning towards rejecting Obama's war plan. Furthermore, the president has apparently ordered Congress to expand the list of targets in Syria for an operation while inviting rebel leaders to Washington for talks. Meanwhile, holding little back, America's envoy to the United Nations launched a tirade against Russia for refusing to back Washington's plans for Syria. Take a listen.
There is no viable path forward in this Security Council. The system has protected the prerogatives of Russia. Russia continues to hold the Council hostage and shirk its international responsibilities, including as a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention.
And while the U.S. envoy in the UN is pushing America's military agenda and throws accusations at Russia, the international body's chief says there's no way the Syrian war could be resolved by bombing.
There is no military solution. There is only a political solution which can bring peace and end this bloodshed right now.
Now, investigative journalist Charlie McGrath says international trust in Washington has all but eroded.
It's extremely harsh. I mean, you know, she's there at in front of the UN talking about Russia holding the Security Council hostage. I mean, making Russia the bad guy because they're Putin is one of the only people in the international community who has the, I want to say courage to stand up and ask super common sense questions. Who benefits from this? And let's not rush to launch $1.5 million Tomahawk cruise missiles because we have a 5-page report that is in large part made up of YouTube clips and Twitter feed. I think the world is war weary and they're no longer trusting the message or the messenger. So it's not a surprise to me that the international community is stepping away from our guaranteed claim that Assad was responsible for this gas attack, if that's indeed what it was.
Now, with the threat of an attack on Syria already roiling markets, the world's business community isn't taking well America's decision to end the down of a stimulus program. In fact, the BRICS group of emerging economies are gathering speed and setting up a global bank of their own intended to act as a buffer to Western crises. Now live to St. Petersburg, and Katie Pilgrim from RT's Venture Capital is joining us. Hello there, Katie, and do tell us what's dominating the business agenda of the summit.
Hello there. Well, it is all about business today, and that's because we have had the B20 meeting, and that includes the biggest business people, the business elite, if you like, the heavyweights. I'm talking about heads of the biggest global banks, companies, CEOs of the big blue chips, and they've come together and they said they want some answers. How are we going to get this job creation? How are we going to deal with the unemployment? 200 million people still unemployed. Over 70 of those are youths, and there's been talk about the lost generation, and really no more short-term fixes. It's all about long-term solutions to the problems that we have at the moment. We know that tax evasion has featured heavily, and it's a topic that everyone pretty much agrees on, and Putin said that it's just the beginning and that there's lots more to be done, but so far there's cooperation between the 20 leaders, which makes up 90% of the global GDP. So in terms of tax evasion, then we know that there's going to be more monitoring of the multi-companies. I'm talking about 28 of the so-called too big to fail banks, and they're going to be monitored for their shadow banking, and there's encouragement from countries that do offer low tax rates to now increase those. So that's the tax evasion issue. As I say, it's just the beginning, but there have been some agreements, to say the least. You mentioned the Development Bank. I wanted to say that this has been a big breakthrough. Before coming here, we didn't know how much money each country was going to be contributing to this, and that had caused some disagreements because each of the BRIC countries, I'm talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are different sizes. So China is the biggest economy, will contribute $41 billion. We're going to have Russia, India and Brazil with $18 billion to the fund, and South Africa with $5 billion. We still don't know where it's going to be located or who is going to be in charge of the bank, and the logistics are still to be decided on. But we know that it is going to happen, and that's because there's almost been a sense of urgency this time round. We know that the emerging economies are suffering, and that's in the light of the volatility, not just their economies but also their currencies as well, on the back of Ben Bernanke, the Federal Reserve Chairman, saying that he's going to pull the plug on the cash injections this coming autumn, and that means that investors have been flocking away from that. I want to mention a few business deals that have been going on, because really it's been focused upon Russia and China. Not just politically are they in the same club at the moment over the issue of Syria, of course, but we've also had some big deals being made. Back in June, of course, we had the announcement of the over $260 million trade deal between the two countries, and now we've had Novatek, a big gas producer in Russia, signing a deal with CNPC as well to really strengthen the trade ties there. So as I say, we've got tax evasion, we've got the emerging economies as well, and it's really at the moment trying to get away from artificial growth. It's about long-term, durable growth, so that we can really deal with the unemployment rates, which are really quite startling, particularly in the Eurozone. So there have been some revelations, and business is being done here, and I can tell you from the business global elite here, they are quite pleased that steps are being made. But as I say, it's a two-day summit, so they are busy people right here. But right now they're having lunch.
All right. Well, there's always time for lunch, Katie. Thanks so much indeed for bringing us this update from St. Petersburg, where G20 is taking place. Katie Peelbin there. Now, think your encrypted internet is unbreakable? Wrong. The NSA has a way into your info. I'll tell you more after the break.